Jonathan, do we have you?
I think we're back, Jack. Sorry about
Hey, there
that.
we go. So, Jonathan, I'd love to get you to weigh in on this question about the sort of the the criminal culpability here. Do you agree with Dr. Chloe? Disagree? I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, no, I thought Dr. Chloe had great insight into this, and she's looking at this through the lens of a clinical psychologist. And in my view, I think you had mentioned socialism earlier. Obviously, socialism doesn't cause people to murder, but in this case, I think the parallel is that the transfer of agency from the individual onto a system is where I see the similarity. So we're not looking at the individual behavior of this person. Instead, we're looking and paying a lot of attention to the system, the healthcare system, even the institution of marriage as being a factor in this. So it's interesting when I look at socialism and the seduction of socialism. It's very appealing to people because, for that very reason. We don't have to look at individual responsibility, but instead we look at the system, whether it's the government, wealthy people, things that are beyond our control as being the cause of our misfortune in life.
I think it's exactly right. I mean, it's well, and here's where they connect. And in a socialist revolution, you would see the same thing. It's all about putting responsibility somewhere else. It's all about saying that it is the external forces that bear responsibility for my life and for my decisions and for my choices. There's nothing that I can do to make my life better. And so whatever I then do, right, whatever action I then take is justified because of all of these other things, which is simply not true. It's all about personal responsibility.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And in the field of psychology, we have a concept known as locus of control. And that means to what extent do we feel as though we have control over our destiny or our fate or outcome? And that would be internal locus of control, or external locus of control is when we feel like we don't have control over that, and it's the system. And that's what we're talking about right now. We have others to blame for our fate or outcomes. So in my work as a therapist, the people who feel like they have control over outcomes, so more of an internal locus of control, they're much better off psychologically, and they end up having much healthier mindsets about things, whether it's their career, family, work-life balance. They seem to do much better and thrive psychologically.
Oh, it's precisely right. And it does absolutely come down to that. We're up on a hard break, but I want to get you back on because this is a key discussion because some of the things that we're going through here, it's yes, it's one case, but it's bigger than that because this is where you get the DSA, this is where you get fifth wave feminism, this is where you get extreme late term abortion, like they just announced up in Massachusetts. People say, "Oh, Poso, why are you connecting all the dots?" Well, I'll tell you why. Because the dots connect. Right back, Human Events Daily. All right, folks, Jack Posobiec, we're back live, Human Events Daily. That was, in that clip right there, that was Charlie talking about me and my relationship with the great Josh Shapiro. I almost ran into Josh Shapiro this past weekend. We were up in Philadelphia. We're at the UFC. And for some reason, Josh went out, he did a little video, and then he ran away, and he didn't come over. I said, Josh, why are your seats up so high? And then I realized it was because when he was too close, he couldn't see. He had to go up higher so he could see better, so he could see the ring. That's why. Josh, we love you, bud. I'll see you in Harrisburg very soon. We're on with Jonathan Alpert. He is a psychotherapist. He is an author. And Jonathan, I want to throw it to you here because I have this contention, and call me nuts, but I have this contention that all these things we're seeing are connected. The socialist revolution, the rise of the DSA, fifth wave feminism, this massive online support for Lindsay Clancy. I actually think they're kind of all the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, we can mention Luigi Mangione and grievance culture.
Oh,
And
yeah, that goes without saying. Yes, of course.
and before we went to break, you mentioned the late term abortion in Massachusetts. And one of the things that's overlooked there is they say Massachusetts is claiming if there's a medical concern. So, in other words, if the mother's life is in danger. And if you read the small print there, it also says the mental health. So now you're going to have my colleagues, therapists going out there claiming that the mother will be mentally unwell or she'll suffer PTSD, so on and so forth. And that's the heart of the topic of my book, Therapy Nation, where my profession is just making people sicker and accommodating them and driving and fueling this grievance culture. And in many ways, I think fueling socialism. It's no one else's, it's never your fault. It's always everyone else's fault. I think, Jack, we talked about micro looting a few months ago, this whole concept of it's okay to steal things from Whole Foods, no one gets hurt. And then over the weekend, I saw that a lawmaker in New York wants to make it legal to shoplift soap and those types of products in New York. And she's claiming that these people must be in need of soap. And she just is so ignorant. She doesn't understand that these people just turn around and sell these products online and make money. So it's all part of the same animal, socialism, my profession largely driving this grievance culture and this socialism, this mindset.
No, I completely agree, and I think that envy, resentment, all of these things do come from grievance culture. There's no question. And ultimately, what does grievance culture tell us? That our actions do not, we do not bear any responsibility for our actions because of the grievance, because of whatever the grievance is, and whether the grievance is, in this case, oh, I have to look after my kids too much, or even though the husband apparently was obviously going on an errand while this all took place, or the grievance is that my rent isn't free and I have to pay to live, ride the bus, and that groceries aren't free and all the rest. And by the way, I've always said, politically speaking, that the best move for us as a movement, as a member of the new right, or whatever we're calling ourselves these days, is to try to better the situation, the living conditions for people, help with the affordability crisis. That's why I've said, and very loudly, that I think that we should be looking at a tax cut, right? Looking at a tax cut, not just for no tax on tips or no tax on Social Security, but up the first $100,000 for an individual, or the first $200,000 for a joint, married filing jointly. Why not? Why not a big tax break? Because then people could work and you'd have more of your own money put in your own pocket. That doesn't allow people to sit around and get money for free, like one of these, these stipends, or people talking about UBI and all these different things. No, you still have to work, but it means the government takes less of it. I think that's perfectly fine. And yet you don't really see many people on the right being willing to actually talk about that. However, from a societal standpoint, we do have to bring back personal responsibility. And we live in a society where we're told that because of the grievance, you're allowed to do or say or think or feel whatever you want, and up to and including, it was the same type of logic, Dr. Alpert, that when Charlie Kirk was killed, people would say, and by the way, even Barack Obama came out and said, I wish it hadn't happened, but here's a list of all the bad things that he said taken out of context. Right. So even Barack Obama, who we know has used this in the past, used grievance culture to talk about the assassination of my friend.
Yeah, and it's a very dangerous frame that people have. If we're saying, well, Charlie was a fine man, but that's fueling these crazies that are
Yeah,
out
don't do
there.
that. Don't do the but. Do not do the but.
Absolutely. Yep. And if I'm working with a patient, I always like to bring it back to the work that I do. If I'm working with a patient, if I want him or her to get worse, I'll just tell that person, it's your boss's fault, it's your spouse's fault, it's your friend's fault. It's not your fault. You're perfect just the way you are. But if I want a patient to get better and thrive and get really strong and become a successful part of the community, I'm going to challenge him, and I'm going to have him really examine his own behavior in the role that he plays in this, so that he can gain some degree of agency and control and learn to grow and become a better, healthier person.
Well, and the idea being there is that ultimately we can't change other people's behavior, but we can change our own. Is that right?
That's what I always say. Focus on the things that are within your control, and our own behavior, our own mindset is usually what's within our control. We can't really control all the crazies that are out there. We can't always control the bad boss or the difficult workplace or the people around us, but we can certainly control how we think about those things.
That's exactly right. And so much though today of, and you've talked about this, of course, in your book, Therapy Nation, that a lot of this bleeds out of therapy culture where it's, oh, it's, I feel this way because my boss said this and therefore I'm going to do that in response. And it's a downward spiral.
Yeah, and it starts in my profession. We have therapists that are labeling people and blaming everyone else, and then those patients go out and they talk to their friends and family, or if they're big on social media, they start spewing this nonsense and regurgitating this nonsense that they heard in their therapy sessions. And before you know it, their millions of followers are starting to believe this and start to think that they too have this pseudo mental health problem or that it's everyone else's fault but their own. So we have a really, really difficult and challenging situation ahead of us if we're trying to tackle the social media machine and my very profession.
That's such a great way of putting it. And you're right that all of this really does come back, even in a case like this. I mean, and it's prescient that you wrote the book at the time you did because you're diagnosing one of the things, obviously not this case specifically, but perhaps this is one of the reasons, because we're living in a therapy nation, that's one of the reasons for this reaction that we're getting, where people are leaning back on these sort of like false diagnoses of themselves and of others to say, oh, well, it's not really her fault and here's why and all the rest. And that fuels things like $1 million GoFundMe drive.
Yeah, no, I saw that. And, people are feeling sympathy for this woman accused of murdering her children. And, they're not able to separate out the mental illness from the actual act. And, the point of this is to focus on the crime that was committed. And, you can feel sympathy for the person. I mean, she obviously is a very deeply troubled person, but, look at these kids, these poor kids that are no longer with us. And that's where the focus should be.
I couldn't agree more. Jonathan, tell people once again, where they can get the book.
Sure, yeah, my book is available on Amazon, Therapy Nation, and then at major booksellers across the nation.
Check it out, folks. And if you're like me, you're scratching your head trying to figure out what is going on. Why does it seem like the world's getting crazier? That is a great place to start. Therapy Nation, Jonathan Alpert. That's why we're seeing the socialist revolution, the rise of the left, late-term abortion, support for Maggioni, support for Lindsay Clancy, all of these things. It all connects. The dots all connect. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to lay ashore.